Cell is one of the greatest villains in Dragon Ball, and his saga revolutionized the franchise. But amid timelines and power levels, there is a layer that remains less explored. It explains why Cell acts the way he acts, thinks the way he thinks, and fails the way he fails. So stick with me until the end of the video so you can understand all about it. What's up everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to Dragon Dao. Cell is the result of an experiment that collected and combined the cells of the strongest and most important characters in the series up to that point in the story. But those cells didn't just carry biological traits. Instead, they functioned more like a combat inheritance. Cell could use techniques from his donors that weren't purely biological. Techniques his donors had learned, rather than abilities inherent to their species or innate to them. Cell didn't possess things like his donors' memories inside his head, but he carried their potential, techniques, logic, and tendencies. That was exactly what made him so dangerous. This becomes even clearer when Cell himself questions where his impulse to seek overwhelming power came from. He wonders if it might come from the blood of the Saiyans, Frieza, or Piccolo. In other words, the series leaves room for the idea that his cells influenced not only what he was capable of doing, but also what he desired and how he acted. That was exactly how Piccolo interpreted Cell's words. So to me, it is clear that this was how Toriyama wanted fans to understand it, and he left plenty of clues. But which donors are we talking about? The anime expands on this quite a bit, suggesting he had the cells of almost all Z warriors. In the manga though, things are different. Cell explains that Dr. Gero started his project trying to combine the cells of the world's greatest warriors, but soon narrowed the list down to Goku, Piccolo, Vegeta, Frieza, and King Cold. In the manga, the techniques also reinforce this short list. When Cell uses the solar flare, Piccolo raises the question of it being Tien's technique, but Krillin says Goku also knew how to use it. So it seems Toriyama intentionally wanted to prevent Cell from being a mashup of the entire cast, since he built the narrative so that every ability Cell showed in the manga could be derived from these 5 without requiring others. So those 5 are the ones we are going to work with. But I will also analyze the influence of Android 17 and Android 18 since they were part of the formation of semi-perfect and perfect Cell. So let's get started. Let's start with Piccolo. His contribution is one of the fundamental ones, because without Piccolo's cells, the Cell we know simply would not exist. The most distinct inheritance from Piccolo is regeneration, which Cell demonstrated multiple times during the saga. He said himself that this happened because of the Namekian cells. Another inheritance is the ability to reproduce asexually, which King Piccolo demonstrated in the OG phase, and Cell followed this same logic with the Cell Juniors. Cell treated them as his children, just like King Piccolo treated his. But we will talk more about this ability later. Regarding techniques, Cell did not demonstrate any of Piccolo's techniques in the manga. In the anime though, he used the special beam cannon against Piccolo himself. Many people attribute Cell's cleverness to something inherited from Piccolo, since Piccolo showed that cleverness by tricking Cell, making him talk. Except Piccolo himself said that play did not come from him, but from the wisdom of the former Guardian of Earth. Cell was created with Piccolo's cells from the Saiyan saga, long before he fused with Kami, so I wouldn't highlight Cell's cleverness as something coming from Piccolo. In my view, they are much more connected to another donor. On the other hand, there is an interesting detail. Cell introduced himself as Piccolo's brother. It is a very specific choice of words that is not repeated regarding any other donor. This suggests that at least in his initial forms, Cell felt a greater identification with him. And lastly, there is the fact that when King Piccolo returned, he declared his reign publicly. He made sure everyone knew he had arrived. Cell does the exact same thing when he goes on television to announce the tournament, turning his existence into a public event. Vegeta's contribution is also one of the most striking cases in Cell. Saiyan cells gave him the ability to get stronger after surviving near-death experiences, the famous Zenkai. When Cell self-destructed and regenerated, he returned to his perfect form, even though he no longer had Android 18 absorbed, and he got even stronger than before. Cell himself attributed this power jump to his Saiyan cells. Furthermore, his super perfect form featured an aura with electricity very similar to Super Saiyan 2. Saiyan cells also gave him that drive for battle, very characteristic of the warrior race, which led to the search for strong opponents. In Vegeta, this drive is even more pronounced because it mixes with his own ego as a prince and the strongest Saiyan. That was what led Vegeta to the most inconsequential mistake of the saga, when he allowed Cell to absorb Android 18 and reach his perfect form. In fact, Vegeta not only allowed it, but also interfered so Trunks would not stop Cell. For Vegeta, a victory over an incomplete enemy would not satisfy his pride. He needed the ultimate challenge to prove his superiority. Cell inherited this exact same trait from Vegeta, which manifested in a very very obvious way when he not only allowed Gohan to transform, but did everything he could to make Gohan release his true power. In terms of techniques, Cell shows nothing from Vegeta's in the manga, but in the anime, he used the Gallic Gun against Vegeta himself. Vegeta's influence appears again in the reaction to being outperformed. When Goku surpasses Vegeta with the Kaioken, Vegeta doesn't accept it. He loses his mind and decides to destroy Earth with Gallic Gun. Cell does the same thing when he realizes Gohan's superiority, firing a Kamehameha toward Earth. Cell practically repeated Vegeta's words from that occasion. It is the same meltdown and the same destructive response. But there is one more who also reacted like that and ended up contributing to this mindset of Cell's. Another heavy hitter with a massive influence on Cell is the Emperor of the Universe. From a biological standpoint, Frieza's cells are also fundamental because Cell inherited his extreme resistance. Frieza survives mutilated and even cut in half. It seems the overall damage required to kill Frieza has to be much greater than what is required for any other donor. If Cell only relied on Piccolo's regeneration, he wouldn't be able to survive the damage he took before managing to regenerate. After all, Piccolo was killed by Nappa with a relatively simple attack that didn't cut him or anything. The attack just caused massive overall damage, and his regeneration was useless. Another inherited trait is the ability to survive in space. The anime even showed this, with Cell going into space and destroying some asteroids. In techniques, the most direct contribution is that annoying laser beam Frieza kept firing from his finger. Krillin recognizes that it was Frieza's technique. There is also Frieza's telekinesis, which Cell uses to build the tournament arena. Not in the manga, but in the anime, Cell uses those cutting discs identical to the ones Frieza used against Goku. In behavior and mentality, Frieza's influence is also very distinct. As we have seen, Piccolo understood that since the blood of Frieza and King Cold ran through his veins, Cell was a threat not just to Earth, but to the entire universe. The way Perfect Cell expresses himself and acts has Frieza's signature. His cruelty is completely sophisticated, just like Frieza's. And this becomes evident when he goes to the TV station. He politely says good morning to humanity and speaks in a totally formal tone while announcing terror. He says he was the monster killing people, and that after the tournament, he would kill everyone without exception, because he liked to see faces contorted in terror. And this right here is 200% Frieza, right? And to wrap up, Frieza also reacted destructively upon being outperformed, just as he did on Namek, trying to destroy the planet when Goku surpassed him. So a mix of his influence and Vegeta's was responsible for Cell's reaction against Gohan. We've come to King Cold, the most underrated donor, and it is easy to understand why. The guy appears for just a few chapters, barely speaks, practically doesn't even fight, and dies quickly to Trunks. In terms of biological influence, he's overshadowed by Frieza, who proved to have extreme durability and the ability to survive in space. King Cold was taken out by Trunks after being pierced by a relatively simple attack, one far less devastating than the attacks Frieza endured while remaining alive and conscious. So Frieza is the one who represents this monstrous durability. King Cold may share some of it, since he's Frieza's father and belongs to the same species, but Frieza is the one who actually demonstrated it. There is also no Cold signature move in Cell. There is no technique being inherited. There is no combat scene for you to point at and say, hey, that looks like something Cold did once. That clearly came from him. So the easiest conclusion is to treat Cold as just additional DNA, as if he were only part of Cell because he showed up alongside Frieza and the spy robot happened to be collecting samples. But it is not quite like that. King Cold was fundamental. There's another biological aspect that makes Cold interesting, his reproductive capacity. It's true that we never saw this happen, like we did with King Piccolo, but Frieza is Cold's son, and Toriyama once said that Frieza was born from his father alone, already extremely powerful and having inherited mutant traits. And it turns out the Cell Juniors follow this exact same logic. They are born directly from Cell's body, already extremely powerful from the very first moment. They are not incomplete copies that need to grow gradually. So Cell seems to have inherited this reproductive logic from Piccolo, but also to a large extent from Cold as a combination. Putting aside purely biological traits, we can talk about what is most interesting. King Cold's influence is fundamental for us to understand Cell before perfection. The Cell who wants to survive, grow, find an opening, change the conditions, and achieve the result. At this stage, Cell still couldn't afford to act like Goku, Vegeta, or Frieza. He was much closer to Cold's logic. Cold is pragmatic. When he arrives on Earth with Mecha Frieza, his first solution is extremely simple: destroy the planet from space. He does not seem interested in proving he is better in a fight. He says they must defeat the Super Saiyan regardless of the necessary methods. And this sets Cold apart from the other donors. Goku and Piccolo want to fight. Vegeta and Frieza want to humiliate and prove their superiority. Cold is less romantic than them. When Cold realizes Trunks is dangerous, he tries to turn him into an ally. He offers the prestige of being part of his family and owning planets to rule. He tries to buy Trunks with power and status. Afterward, he tries to disarm him and flip the situation from there. They were simple attempts, even a bit pathetic after they failed, but the logic behind them is clear, and it is exactly this logic that appears in Imperfect Cell. He is not interested in the fight itself and does not possess an ego that prevents him from backing down. He is an incomplete creature trying to build his own advantage, and this advantage consists of avoiding unnecessary confrontations, running away, hiding, absorbing ordinary people, waiting for the right moment, or even utilizing the enemy's ego as a tool. Even in his semi-perfect form, Cell still maintained this logic. The best example was the way he tried to manipulate Vegeta. He knew Vegeta wouldn't be satisfied defeating an incomplete enemy, that his pride would demand something greater than that. So he appealed to Saiyan pride and Vegeta's own ego so he would allow him to reach his perfect form, which also ended up being a sort of negotiation. Vegeta would give him the chance to become complete, and in return, Cell would give Vegeta the fight he wanted. And this logic goes even further when we remember the time travel. Cell doesn't accept the conditions of his own timeline. In his timeline, Trunks somehow managed to defeat Android 17 and Android 18. So he kills Trunks, steals the time machine, and searches for a reality where a chance to complete his body still exists. This is Cold's opportunism and pragmatism. When Cell reaches his perfect form, Cold's influence loses ground, and a mix of the other donors' qualities and flaws begins to take over. And ironically, those exact traits are what caused Cell to be defeated. King Cold is not Cell's greatest influence, but he is far from irrelevant. He was decisive in getting Cell where he ended up. We finally come to Goku, who is one of the most interesting, but not because of the cliché desire to get stronger or the will to face powerful opponents. Goku's influence goes way beyond that, appearing in details that often go unnoticed, and I'm sure some of them will surprise you. Just as it was with Vegeta, his Saiyan cells give Cell some fundamental traits of the race, which we already covered in Vegeta's section, so there is no need to repeat. When it comes to techniques, Cell could use Goku's Kamehameha, and said that if he wanted to, he could even create a spirit bomb. And a quick side note here, notice how Toriyama made sure to forget about Kaioken. But the most interesting inherited ability is none of those. Cell saw Goku use instant transmission a few times before and during their fight. And then, after self-destructing and regenerating, Cell managed to return to Earth using instant transmission. Think about it. Cell didn't know instant transmission until he saw Goku utilizing the technique. Instant transmission was not part of Goku's original database, so to speak, which the computer responsible for creating Cell had collected. Goku's cells were collected during the Saiyan saga, but Goku only learned instant transmission on Yardrat much later. So how did Cell manage to execute the technique? It was because Cell inherited Goku's own ability to understand and copy other people's techniques. Goku demonstrated this ability multiple times throughout the series. Goku copied the Kamehameha just by seeing Master Roshi utilize it a single time. He also copied the afterimage technique, copied King Chappa's 8-arm technique, copied the solar flare, and used it against Tien himself in the following tournament. Therefore, Cell managed to perform this feat thanks to Goku's contribution. In terms of mindset and behavior, another influence from Goku appears when Cell states that a fight needs to be balanced to be fun, and Goku immediately agrees. Since Frieza and Vegeta frequently like to humiliate others with an absurd power gap, this desire for balance seems to be a very specific view of Goku's on what makes a combat interesting. The connection between the two becomes even more evident in the way Cell and Goku fight and view each other, functioning almost like a mirror. It's no wonder their fight in the anime is one of the best in the entire series. They analyze each other, anticipate each other, and recognize each other. Cell said Goku is an extraordinary fighter who possesses something the others didn't. Goku said Cell is a warrior with no weaknesses and extremely intelligent. And the manga reinforces this connection in a way that leaves no room for doubt in the case of Super Saiyan Grade 3. Chapter 387 alternates between scenes of Cell fighting Trunks and Goku training in the Room of Spirit and Time. Cell points out the flaws of the transformation, while Goku reaches the exact same conclusions. Cell even goes so far as to say that power is not everything, which is the exact same thing Goku said in the fight against Raditz. Toriyama did all of this intentionally. And one final trait of Goku's that probably also left its mark on Cell was the decision to hold a tournament. Because think about it, Goku grew up within tournament culture. Even though he was already very strong, Goku always wanted to become the champion of the tournament itself. He believed the tournament was the legitimate way to prove who was the best. The Cell Games, with a built arena, a set date, and the whole world invited, carry this logic. Cell needed the validation of an official event with rules and spotlights because he was influenced by the mindset of the greatest competitor the World Martial Arts Tournament has ever seen. Let's move on to the androids now. Unlike the original donors who make up Cell's biology, the androids are absorbed. Except their absorption is different from the other absorptions. Cell treated humans just as bioenergy for his power increase. Cell absorbed them through a practically digestive method, driving his stinger into them, dissolving their bodies and sucking them in entirely. Even Piccolo would be absorbed by this digestive method, so much so that his arm was almost entirely drained. On the other hand, the androids were absorbed whole without being digested, seeming more like they were being stored inside Cell than anything else. On top of that, the androids weren't treated as mere sources of bioenergy. Cell says that to reach his perfect form, he needed 2 essential life forms. The computer told him that by absorbing the androids, he would become perfect in every aspect: power, speed, technique, intelligence, and mental strength. Therefore, the androids were necessary stages for Cell's evolution as a superior life form. In addition to the big 5 donors, Cell was also formed by other minor donors described by Toriyama as many other creatures. And it seems these creatures had the greatest influence on Cell's structure. It's true that Piccolo, Frieza, and Cold were also strange, but Imperfect Cell was much stranger. Cell was a grotesque creature with monstrous features, looking more like an insect than anything else, and that is the first major effect the androids had on Cell. They changed him structurally. Upon absorbing Android 17, Cell's body became more humanoid, more muscular, and in a way even more masculine. He started to look more like a warrior. His hands changed. The ones that previously had 3 fingers now had 5, exactly like human hands. This makes sense since Android 17 was an enhanced human. Another major direct influence from Android 17 was the disproportionate increase in speed. Piccolo said Android 17 was much faster than he was strong. Semi-Perfect Cell stated that his speed increased as a result of absorbing Android 17. Even though the overall power increase came from the absorption as a whole, Android 17 had this specific attribute as a major highlight. In his perfect form, Cell bragged a few times about his speed, going so far as to say that even without possessing instant transmission, he was already extremely fast, implying he would not lag behind Goku's technique at all. As for techniques, Cell inherited the ability to create a barrier, Android 17's very characteristic defensive skill. Android 17 utilized it to save himself from an attack by Piccolo, and Cell used it to defend against Goku's attacks. In terms of mindset and behavior, Android 17 had a very specific relationship with his own strength. He believed he was the most powerful warrior in the world, repeating this a few times throughout the saga. And it turns out Cell inherited this same pride after reaching perfection. Of course, this pride of being the strongest also comes from Vegeta and Frieza, but we cannot fail to point out that Android 17 also contributed. We also have a very clear parallel between Android 17's attitude when telling Krillin that the Z-Warriors should get stronger and come back to face him, and Cell's attitude when telling Trunks and Vegeta to get stronger and come back to face him at the Cell Games. And speaking of the Cell Games, we have something interesting. Android 17 was created with a clear mission: kill Goku. He could have simply gone after the target in the most direct way possible, but that was not how he acted. Android 17 turned the mission into a journey, into entertainment. When Krillin asked the androids why they still wanted to kill Goku if Dr. Gero had already been killed, Android 17 said that it was just a game to him. Goku was supposedly the strongest in the world and he wanted to face him, but Krillin didn't even need to say where Goku was, because hunting him down was also part of that game. Notice that Android 18 didn't think that way. This was a very specific view from 17. Perfect Cell's decision to create the Cell Games might also have happened because of this influence from Android 17. Of course, it would be an exaggeration to say this influence came solely from him. After all, we also identified the tournament as coming from Goku's influence. But Cell could also have acted in the most efficient way possible. He had reached an absurd level of power. He could have eliminated everyone and destroyed everything immediately, but he did not do that. He decided to create the Cell Games for his own entertainment. It was this decision by Android 17 that gave the Z-Warriors time to reorganize and get stronger than the androids. And it was the decision to give the Warriors 10 days to train that also caused Cell to be outperformed. Now, speaking of the influence of Android 18, As we have seen, upon absorbing Android 17, Cell had his monstrous features softened, but his appearance was still that of a rougher creature. Semi-perfect Cell's face stopped looking insect-like, but took on a somewhat goofy appearance. So much so that Toriyama's own editor thought his design looked kind of dumb and asked him to move quickly to the next form. So the absorption of Android 18 caused a radical aesthetic correction. The long tail used for absorption retracts almost completely, which makes sense, since its primary function lost its purpose. Cell's body became much more proportional, more aerodynamic, even more humanoid, and in a way even more feminine as well. That ugly face, without a nose, finally turned into a face much closer to a human face. We have some sketches by Toriyama where Cell appears even more humanoid, with a face looking like a blonde elf, with features that clearly resemble those of Android 18. We don't know which forms each of these sketches was connected to, but it is interesting because if this specific one were a sketch of the perfect form, it would indicate that Toriyama considered making Cell look much more like Android 18 than what we saw. The absorption of Android 18 also added much more power to Cell than the absorption of Android 17. The jump from the semi-perfect to the perfect form was much greater than from the imperfect to the semi-perfect form. There are theories about why this would have happened since 18 was weaker than 17. Some say it might be because Android 18 actually possessed the greatest hidden power between the twins, which was intentionally suppressed by Dr. Gero in an attempt to gain the android's obedience, which also ended up failing. But the most interesting way to view this is to recognize that the absorption of Android 18 also brought stability and efficiency. Android 16 had a power meter, and he said that Super Vegeta was still superior to Perfect Cell in everything, but for some reason Cell was already managing to do better than him. So at that moment, Cell was still objectively inferior in numbers, but already had the advantage in practice. It seems Cell started using his power with much more efficiency, perhaps through better energy management and economy of movement, or a sharper sense of timing. In the field of techniques, there is nothing that can be directly attributed to Android 18, especially since she did not show anything characteristic like 17's barrier. After absorbing Android 18, Cell completely abandoned the survivor and predator mindset of the previous form, which was influenced by the psychology of other donors. Perfect Cell's mindset is much closer to that of a warrior. We can also say that Cell inherited a type of psychological taunting similar to what Android 18 used. Vegeta and Frieza like to humiliate with declared superiority, calling opponents garbage, insects, and things like that. The type of taunting Android 18 used was more subtle, acting as if the enemy should not even be taken seriously. That was how she got into Vegeta's mind. She said he could run if he wanted to, that he even fought well for someone made of flesh and bone, but that he was nothing special. When Cell reaches his perfect form, he adopts this posture against the same Vegeta. He taunted, made faces, mocked Super Vegeta, and laughed, pretending he had suffered critical damage from his attack. This behavior resembles Android 18's style more than the others. Android 18 was the final piece that transformed Cell into someone much more powerful and smug. But now I want to know from you, what do you think about all of this? Do you think there are other connections that I missed? Comment your opinion down below. If you stayed until here, you must have liked it. So I want to ask for your like and your subscription here to the channel to keep following discussions like this one. And here on the screen, 2 more videos will appear that I am sure you will like. See you in the next video here at Dragon Dao.